Hey guys, it's Rodney, and today I'm going to walk you through how we made our egg and root veggie holder out of some scrap 3/4 inch plywood and hardware cloth left over from the chicken coop. Now, you might be asking yourself how we got to this point in the build already, and I have no idea because apparently I already lost the video. However, we did make some 3-inch strips out of 3/4 inch maple plywood, and then every 2.5 inches I drilled a 1 5/8 inch hole, which will hold the eggs nice and neat in these little cradles. I did take a 3/4 inch roundover bit to each of the holes on both the top and bottom, just because it is plywood and it had some splintery edges. So now that we're all caught up, let's talk a little bit about the edge banding. We are using a 3/4 inch maple edge banding here, and the iron is really the best way to apply this. It heats up the glue that is already on the edge banding, and then you can just use a nice, clean, sharp razor blade to trim off the excess. I typically like to start the edge banding about 1/4 inch over the edge, because as you are ironing on, you are putting some pressure and you're starting to kind of pull it tight, so it's really easy for it to get kind of out of line. So if it's not something you've done before, just leave yourself a little excess and then go nice and slow. A nice, smooth, even pressure with the iron is kind of the best way to go here to get the nice finish of the product itself to adhere to something like a plywood edging. And because we're using a 3/4 inch edge banding on a 3/4 inch piece of plywood, typically it is going to be the exact same size. If not, just go ahead and trim off any excess. And now we're on to finishing the wood, and of course you already know I'm going to use the Watco Danish oil in the dark walnut. This combo with the maple plywood is just one of my favorites lately. I'm super obsessed with how it looks. It is an easy wipe-on application, so you can see me here just using a soft cloth, and you essentially just rub it on like you would like a poly finish almost. But you want to just make sure that you kind of go with the grain as your final swipe on the wood itself, just to prevent any kind of streaking or soaking in. But I just love the Watco oil finish. It's got great coverage. It gives a little bit of a shine to the piece of wood once it's done, but it's so clean and so simple and easy to install. All right, so now that our finish has dried and cured, what we are going to do is start our assembly. And really, assembly for this piece is pretty simple. It is a pretty straightforward box. So you can see I started with the sides and placed either the top or the bottom on. And then I used one of our shelves or egg shelves there just to make sure that our spacing was all good and in line. And that I had the right butt ends together for the sides and the tops. But basically, we're just going to make one large open frame here first. And you'll see me in just a minute. We're going to use some Titebond 3 and our 90-degree clamps to hold everything together while I throw in a couple of finishing nails. And then we'll just go ahead and repeat the same process with a little bit of glue, angles, and finishing nails for the other side. Now for the egg holder shelves, I use some of the scrap 3-inch pieces to make 3-inch blocks basically, because the size of this shelf for our space, we're gonna have 3 inches in between each of the shelves. And I am just looking through each of the shelves here because not all of the holes drilled perfectly. So the ones that we're gonna see the most, I just wanted to make sure we're up at the top because that's where we're gonna see both the top and bottom of the shelf. But I just used a little bit of the Titebond 3 again, use those 3-inch blocks as spacers, slid in our shelf, held on tight with my hand on either side, and then just used the finishing nailer to knock in some nails for some tight support. And then I just repeated that process for each of the 3 remaining shelves, giving us about 4 shelves total for egg storage, making a total storage of about 40 eggs. And then finally, we needed a way to, of course, hang this on the wall, so I cut a 1.5-inch strip of the same 3/4-inch maple plywood, added a little bit of glue on 3 sides, and we're putting this on the underside of the top piece. And I'm just going to use the same process here, use a finishing nailer for each side to get it secured together, and then I'll pre-drill some holes into this nailer, which will go straight into the studs on the wall. Now, once I got everything leveled and lined up, I wanted the top of this to line up with the top of the window that opens from our kitchen to the den down below. I just used some 2.5-inch screws to go through my pre-drilled holes on our nailer straight into the studs of the wall. And then once it was installed, of course, a couple of little accessories to see how it was going to work in this space. And then, of course, we had to test fit our eggs to make sure that these fit properly. Again, that 1 5/8 inch hole seemed to work the best after a couple of tests. But once it was all done, we kind of realized we didn't love the space, so we had a different idea to add some root veggie storage. So let's get to that. I used the same 3/4-inch maple plywood and used our new bandsaw to cut out these kind of trough shapes. We're going to basically make like a large trough out of this. So I had to cut holes on the back upper side for a nailer, just like we did for our egg holder. And then I also cut kind of a slot across the front here in these more kind of trapezoid shapes, which will hold our mesh in place when we go ahead and install the hardware cloth. So we can see there, that's going to be the nailer for our hardware cloth, and that'll sit in tight. And that was again about an 1.5-inch strip. And then I did a 2-inch strip for the nailer in the back because that's where most of the weight for these are going to hold. So I've got both of those, kind of trying to show you guys how it's going to come together here. But yeah, we can see our nailer and then our front board that will work as our nailer for our hardware cloth. And we followed the same steps where we used our 3/4-inch edge banding around the edges that were going to be exposed. And then, of course, again with the Watco Danish oil in the dark walnut here. Again, obsessed with the dark walnut color on this maple plywood lately for some reason. But we went ahead and got all of those stained and then set them aside to dry. Now, once everything was dry, I went ahead and grabbed that 1.5-inch piece that's going to go on the front. Like I mentioned earlier, it's going to be our kind of our nailer, and I'm using the 1/4-inch hardware cloth that was left over from the coupe build here, and I've cut that at the same width. In our space, this entire piece is about 24 inches wide, and then I used our new DeWalt hand stapler to get everything stapled in, and about 6,000 100 billion trillion staples later, we finally had a basket shape. And then on our nailer that we're going to use to secure this piece to the wall, I'm going to go ahead and mark center on this. and then I'm gonna get everything pre-drilled for some screws. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna screw through the back of this nailer into these kind of support or basket supports and dividers, which will hold everything nice and tight and snug. So again, a little bit of tight bond 3, and then we'll get those lined up with that back notch that we created earlier. And I am using, I believe these are 1 5/8" screws here, but we'll do this times 3 to get them all together. And then we'll take the hardware cloth and staple that across the front of each of those little basket supports. And then we'll get it lined up in the same process. We've already pre-drilled our hole in the nailer, so we're just gonna get that lined up to the bottom of our little egg holder shelf thing here, and use those 2.5" screws and screw those into the exact same studs that we've already used. So once we got this installed and got it filled up with things like potatoes, we also realized that we could get rid of this 3-tier hanging basket that we see on the left, just to open up the view more from the kitchen to the den. So we were super excited about that as well. And if you guys like this video, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that little bell icon to be notified when we post other videos in the future. And if you have not, check out rodneyandjake.com, where we've got our blog and merch and other little goodies there for you guys to check out. And as always, we want to say thank you guys so much for following along and watching our videos, and a huge shout out to all of our members. We'll see you guys next time.